Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and my goal is to help members of the military community succeed in their post-service career. Today's episode number 377, The Ideal Team Player.
It's about winning the hearts and minds of the employees so that they're committed to the cause. And it comes back to a point that Mike raised at the very, very beginning, and that is when you're in the military, when you give out an order, people do it. And if their heart and soul isn't into doing it, they got a sergeant major that's going to breathe down their neck. Whereas here, you have to lead, and you can't pretend to be a leader. You can't hide behind a rank on your shoulder. You actually have to lead through the issue, and get people motivated to solve the problem and to deliver. Because they want to do it, and they want to do it because it's for the best of the organization. It's for the best of the company. And I would say that is probably the hardest thing.
My conversation today is with two different veterans, senior in the tech industry. In addition to talking about their long and successful career, including operations, program management, product management, and more, we talk about the ideal team player based on their experience hiring hundreds of people, the difference between a good boss and a bad boss, differences in leadership out of the military, and more. This interview brings over 20 years of hard-earned experience that is a wealth of knowledge regardless of your desired career path. As always, at beyondtheuniform.org, you'll find show notes with links to everything we discuss, as well as over 376 other exceptional episodes just like this one. So with that, let's dive into my conversation with Peter and Mike.
Dive.
Well, joining me today, both in Huntsville, Alabama, in the same office right now, or same building, different offices right now. My guests are Mike Sedgwick and Peter Cianfaglione. Mike and Peter, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Thank you very much.
I want to give listeners some of your backgrounds, and I'll start with Mike. He is a vice president of defense and aerospace products for SCI Technology. He is responsible for the oversight of SCI's aircraft and tactical product organizations, including the FireComm and TOCNET product lines. Maybe I said that incorrectly. He has extensive expertise in wide-ranging areas, including strategic planning, defense and aerospace contract management, P&L accountability, business development, product management contracts, budgeting, scheduling, and logistics. Previously, he's held titles of Senior Program Manager and Director of Aircraft Systems with SCI. And prior to SCI, he was General Manager of AAR Integrated Technologies and Business Director for the Hypersonic Design and System Integration segment at I3. Mike has managed organizations and teams that include program management, engineering, contracts, quality, manufacturing, HR, and supply chain to ensure the seamless production of sophisticated defense and aerospace hardware. Beyond his impressive business credentials, he served honorably in the U.S. Armed Forces. He served in the U.S. Army Reserve as a military intelligence officer and Battalion Intelligence Officer with 10th Special Forces Group Airborne, and as a company executive officer with the 82nd Airborne Division. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in manufacturing engineering from the Brigham Young University and an MBA from the University of Phoenix. And let me give a pause for Peter, who is the Vice President of Operations at SCI Technology. He is responsible for SCI's manufacturing operations to include production, manufacturing, quality engineering, and supply chain. He was born and raised in Ottawa, Canada, completed an electrical engineering degree at the University of Ottawa in the regular officer training program, which is the Canadian equivalent to the ROTC. During and upon completion of his degree, he served in the Canadian Army as a combat engineer and infantry officer, including service with the Commando in the Canadian Airborne Regiment. In 1993, Peter joined Motorola while transitioning to reserve service. He moved to the U.S. in 1997 with Motorola while continuing his service as a Canadian Army Reservist, including exchange position postings with the 82nd Airborne, 36 ID, and 4th ID. In addition to these roles, he also supported the sharing of information between the Canadian and United States militaries on lessons learned in IED awareness for both the Iraq and Afghanistan campaigns. Shortly after becoming a U.S. citizen in 2005, he was mobilized in support of recovery operations following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Following to move to Huntsville in 2006, Peter took on various capacities with Benchmark Electronics and electronics manufacturing, while both continuing his role with the Canadian Army Reserves, as well as completing a master's degree in electrical engineering. Peter returned to his town in Ottawa from 2009 to 2011 to work for General Dynamics while commanding a reserve engineer battalion. While in Ottawa, he completed his third and final deployment. And upon his return to the United States in 2011, he resumed work with Benchmark Electronics in various capacities, including General Manager and Vice President of Global Accounts. Peter is a graduate of the Canadian Army Command and Staff Course, New Zealand Grade 2 Staff Course, and Canadian Joint Command and Staff Program. He joined SCI in 2020 and is currently working towards completion of his PhD in engineering. He and his wife of 25 years have 7 children, 2 of which are presently serving in the U.S. military. So let me take a breath there. Mike and Peter, you both have extremely distinguished careers. I just want to make space if there's anything you want to add or amend to those bios.
Well,
I'll just add, go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, one of the things that I did do, and we'll talk about this as we go about our session today. I also completed an MBA because I recognized that was a weakness in my skills that I needed to bolster in order to make that transition to the civilian career. So that is not included in the bio.
Thank you.
And I was going to include that I started out in the infantry as a ground pounder, just like Pete, and did a transition into intelligence later in my career. I had 3 deployments as well, 2 to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan, 2 as an infantryman and 1 as an intelligence officer. So.
Awesome. Thank you both. So let's start with Peter, and then we'll go to Mike. But I would love to learn about the initial transition you took from the military to being a civilian, and most importantly for our audience, how you navigated choosing your career path.
Right. Yeah. So that was a great question. It was a time when the Canadian military was going into a very slow period. There were budget cuts. We had a federal government that wasn't very pro-military at the time in Canada. So, if you saw the tea leaves, you could anticipate that the next decade or so was going to be a rough time to be a soldier. So I decided to get out, and I would say the things that I was scared initially. There was some fear. I had done it my transition out of the active duty at a time when it was just following the recession in 1990 to 1992. So the newspapers were full of stories about people being laid off and having a hard time paying their mortgage and all that. So there was a tendency on the part of people in the military that were leaving to, it's easier just to stay in and continue to collect that solid paycheck. So there's a risk to take. And also, am I up for that challenge? Are my skills suitable for the civilian workforce? And I did take that transition. And the best way to describe it initially, because I really missed some parts of the military. I missed the camaraderie, the people, the being part of something that was a lot bigger than you, and transitioning into an environment where it was nowhere near as exciting from a day-to-day perspective. And I almost characterized it initially as sort of like a bad breakup. Where you're missing, so the things you miss are you really miss, and so that for a while there was a bit of anxiety with the transition, but in the end it worked out. I think a lot of the reason why it worked out was because I continued to serve in the reserves and also in the mental preparation.
That's great. Thank you. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, a lot of the same feelings as Peter. One of the things that really helped me, because I loved my time in the Army, absolutely loved it for the same reasons that Pete talked about, as far as the camaraderie, the excitement. So going into the reserves, it was the same. That helped with my transition. When I joined the Army, I never intended to be a career guy. I never intended to do 20 years. So mentally, I was always prepared earlier in my career. I planned to do 3 to 4 years and ended up doing almost 8. So for me, I was excited to get out into the business world. I again knew I was transitioning, so I finished my MBA before I got out. And I think it was a tough transition, one that I was ready for. But I think one of the biggest differences, I think, from working in the military and what you're used to transferring into the civilian space is it actually takes, in my opinion, even more leadership and more personal skills, because in the military, you tell somebody to do something, you take for granted that it's going to get done. It's going to get done just because you said it. And then you get to the civilian world and you got a group of engineers working on a project. You say, hey guys, we're behind schedule. We got to work this weekend. And 2 of them say, oh no, I got a birthday this weekend. And one of them says, I'm going on vacation. And that was kind of a shock to me at first. But then you get used to it. You realize who you're dealing with and what kind of circumstances you're dealing with, but you don't control their lives like you do in the military. And it takes a little bit more nuance in your leadership, I think, to leave the Army.
I love that awareness of the changing circumstances and that kind of dawning on you and realizing like, oh, I'm imagining you have to realize like, oh, there's different tools I need as a leader to be able to get the same results, and kind of seeing that jarring transition. Let's start with Mike this time, and then we'll go to Peter. But if just to set the stage for people so they understand what you do, if you were to, Mike, bump into someone on the street and found out that they served in the military, or maybe they're on active duty, and they say, oh, Mike, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that?
I'd say I'm really into program management. So even though my title right now is Vice President of Products, I started out as a program manager as soon as I came out of the military, really kind of knowing that that's what I wanted to get into. I've worked in manufacturing, and now I work in defense electronics manufacturing. I've done that for a while, but to me, as you kind of go up the chain in a company, it's just more and more levels of program management in the track that I'm in. You start out as a program manager, learning the ropes and managing maybe a individual small program, and then you just grow. Pretty soon you own a portfolio of programs, and pretty soon you have other program managers reporting to you that own portfolios. And I really enjoyed program management, and that's really what I consider myself doing now, even though I manage it now at the business level and own the profit and loss for a large segment of the business. I still really consider it the core program management.
That's great. Thank you. How about you, Peter?
Yeah, so I would consider myself the sort of the pointy end, if you will, in terms of actually having to direct operations. So think along the lines of like a battalion commander or perhaps a brigade commander, where you've got responsibility for operations. You've got to deliver either a service or a product, and you've got a whole staff of people. So I've got the vast majority of employees that work for me. So I have to, every day you deal with the human resources side, you deal with directing, and you have to deal with making sure that people are aligned and communicating and whatnot. So I think I probably have the closest approximation to what individuals would see in the military when they think of, for example, their commander running an operations. That's in essence what I've got, and this a lot of the same challenges that somebody who's a leader in the military has. I have the same challenges, but again, to Mike's earlier point that you have to you don't control the resources 24/7, and so there's some nuances associated with that, but we run a 24-hour operation here, so you got to deal with things outside of hours and all that stuff. So whenever something goes wrong, you have to be in the middle of it and stuff like that. So think of it in that context.
And I want to ask, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting this, but for both of you, it seems like at a high level, you left the military you chose an industry of, let's call it manufacturing. And then at some point you I don't know if you would call it niching down, but you went even further to defense manufacturing. And I'm curious, what led you down that path? What initially attracted you to manufacturing, and then what attracted you again into the defense side of things later in your career? And we'll start with Mike and then Peter.
Okay. So good question. From my bio, you know that I have a degree in manufacturing engineering. So manufacturing was always something that I was very interested in. And then as I knew I was going to be transitioning out of the military, it really goes back. The reason I got into defense manufacturing, it really goes back to, that was obviously I had experience now in the defense industry, or in defense in general. But it was also man, this is another way where I can kind of continue to contribute to the fight and continue to, contribute to the progress of the war, contribute to soldiers' well-being, even on the civilian side. So I was in the reserves. That was a good transition for me. But going into defense industry was a transition for me as well, feeling like I was still part of the bigger picture that Pete talked about.
That's great. Thank you.
Yes. So from my perspective, when I left the military and worked at Motorola, it was a product design role. So I was designing communications products. So it was very pure engineering, but I used to interact quite regularly with the manufacturing operations, because whatever I designed had to go into manufacturing. And then I got to watching the way that operations conducted itself, and some of the nuances associated with that. And I believe that it fit better with my personality. You have to be more of a communicator, more integrating with people, as opposed to as a design engineer, you're more tied into computer related design activities and so on. And I really enjoy the human interaction side of it. So I made the transition into manufacturing, and I've worked in various different roles in manufacturing, all the way from building computer products to the tune of $100,000 a month, to building small units, a small volume of a very complex unit. But to Mike's point, though, I really gravitated towards the aerospace defense industry, more the defense industry, because of the fact that I had the ability to support the warfighter, and that to me is a passion. So the ability to contribute in some form that beyond just building cell phones or something. And I think number two is that when I was deployed and on various phases in my career, I used to run into pieces of equipment that I felt were poorly manufactured, or there seemed to be it didn't work very well, or there were some errors or flaws in it. And I used to think about how there should have been much more attention to detail put into that product, and so that's why I'm pretty passionate about this industry.
And you've touched on, I wanted to kind of, for listeners who might be casting their sights on what do I do after the military, or what's my next career move, I wanted to just give them a little bit of context of what you perceive as the differences between these two industries. So I don't even know if this is the right way to create the distinction, but I would say like manufacturing versus on the defense side of manufacturing. One thing that's come through already from both of you is there is that sense of purpose and being part of the mission of contributing to our national security. So that definitely comes through. I'm just curious if you've observed anything else that's different in terms of how the company might operate, or any differences that stand out to you between defense and non-defense. And we'll start with Peter and then go to Mike.
Yeah, most certainly. There are a lot of challenges that are unique to the defense and aerospace industry. A lot of it has to do with government regulations, FARs, DFARs, which are acquisition terms. So you have to, there's a lot of restrictions that don't exist, for example, if you're building cell phones, in terms of the qualification and whatnot. Um, so there is that uniqueness, but the challenge I think that we often run into, and I, Mike can amplify this if he wishes to, but one of the challenges we deal with here is that we're a defense portion of a parent company that does other things. They build other products, and so it's trying to work with all the limitations and the challenges and the restrictions that are associated with building defense articles in the context of a company that may not necessarily understand or appreciate all these idiosyncrasies, and being able to kind of work in that environment sometimes can be challenging.
Yeah. And before we go on to Mike, just one quick thing, Peter, could you clarify for listeners and also for me? So you're both part of SCI Technology, but your parent company, and let me know if I'm mispronouncing this, but Sanmina. Could you kind of clarify for listeners what the relationship there is and how they relate?
Yeah, certainly. So SCI Technologies is a wholly owned corporation that falls under Sanmina. Sanmina is a multi-billion-dollar, I think it's $8 billion a year sales, multi-billion-dollar contract manufacturer. So they build electronic products. They could have one production line building cable modems, another production line building cell phones. They might have computer products, and they could be building medical devices, ventilators, and whatnot. But we're just the defense portion of that. So our specialty is building, again, defense articles and in space and aerospace products.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. So Mike, you were going to continue Peter's thread on this kind of distinction between the two industries there.
Yeah, I really think Pete hit it. The first thing that popped into my mind when you asked the question was the regulation, because there's so many, manufacturing is manufacturing, that you have to put out high quality product. You have to deliver to your customers on time. So there's so much in common there. But then when you're building for defense, there's just a whole different set of regulations that you have to deal with. And I would say that that the regulations and dealing with the government slows down the cycle time as well. Whereas if I was working for Apple and we come up with the iPhone 12, we're going to release that thing in 18 months, and it's going to be off and marketing it and out the door. Whereas on the government side, they'll release a request for proposal, and then they'll put out a specification, and then dozens of companies bid on it. And it's just a very slow, very purposeful process to make sure that you follow all the acquisition rules appropriately. So sometimes that's frustrating, but at the same time, you get to work on something that's a lot more cool than a cell phone. You're putting most of the things that we build, whether it's an intercom system or data concentrators or parts for missiles and things like that, electronics that go inside, almost all of them have something to do with life or death for some of our soldiers, or the effectivity of our weapon systems on the battlefield. So it's satisfying.
I appreciate the nuance there, where it's almost like the downside is the regulation and the speed and the bureaucracy, and the other side is like, well, you are dealing with things that are incredibly high stakes, and it's higher impact, and so therefore you have to move more slowly and more deliberately. And I love that trade-off, because sometimes I think we try to simplify things to either good or bad, but there's both sides there, and one might be unappealing, but the other is appealing, and they go hand in hand. You can't really have one without the other.
Right.
And
when you're, I have two of my children are serving in the U.S. military right now, and one of them's in the Air Force, one of them's in the Army, and the one that's in the Air Force, there is a high probability that there's going to be an aircraft that she's going to fly that has a product or an article built in this building, and so it's personal. And everybody who works in SCI knows somebody or is somehow has a connection to the military and feels that connection, and that's very important.
I want to share something that Pete, that's so true. And when I first came to SCI as a program manager, I mean, I was fresh out of the Army and fresh out of a deployment to Iraq. But I got the group together and I told them a story about a fight that we got into Afghanistan that kind of was dragging on, and they called my platoon. We were the QRF, and we went up through the mountains, and we lost comms completely with anybody. Back then, we didn't have satellite communications. This was very early in the war, and we finally got an Apache on station, and I could talk to the pilot, and that was the first person I could talk to probably for after 30 minutes of still driving just out in the mountains trying to find these guys. And I told those guys, I said, the intercom system and everything that Apache was talking through to me was 100% guaranteed built in this building. And the systems processors and weapon processors on that helicopter, 100% guaranteed, were built in this building. And, I had 15 people come up to me after that and said, man, I never realized that. I never, the electrons that were coming down to me came through the resistor that you put on that board or whatever. It really brought things home to them. And it is personal.
I love the intimacy in that for each of you, because sometimes I think you're part of a very large organization, and sometimes the outside perspective is the impersonal nature of that. But I love the representation for both of you, like a very heartfelt connection to this mission and purpose. And I think that's great too, because the overarching mission in and of itself is beautiful, that you're helping defense, you're helping protect our nation. But I love that personal tie that each of you have. I imagine that gives you extra leverage in the day-to-day.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a motivator.
And so we'll start with Peter on this one, and then we'll go to Mike. But I wanted to double click on that thought of the day-to-day, and especially for listeners who might be considering this career path. I understand that every day is different, so you can view it as kind of the month to month or even year to year, but just trying to paint the picture for them of the types of activities that you do and the types of things that fill your day or your year.
Yeah, no, great question. And so amazingly, my day right now, in terms of the job here, is not together all that much different than when I was full time or as a battalion commander. I start off my day with checking in emails, looking for messages that I didn't pick up the night before, sort of getting a sort of a situational awareness for the day, making sure that I'm plugged into any issues that came up in the last 24 hours that I wasn't already aware of. And then I launch in my morning meetings. Every morning I have a team meeting where we go through the operations. We go talk about the quality metrics, the on-time delivery, what issues did we encounter. We deconflict stuff right on the phone. Usually that call goes on about 45 minutes, sometimes a half an hour. And then I launch into a series of meetings or discussions around strategic initiatives that we're trying to drive. You don't want to be stagnant in this business, because that'll kill you. You want to be constantly looking to improve, drive new initiatives and change for the better. And then I always get out on the floor. And that's important to me, is that human interaction, that connection to the men and women that make up our team. So I spend an average of 2 hours a day just walking around, talking to people, actually talking to the operator, somebody who, might have just started yesterday, and all they do is maybe put a circuit board inside of a housing, and just talking to them and finding out what how they can improve the job, what can be done differently. And get some feedback from the folks on the floor that touch it every day, and also it gives me an opportunity to pass along my sort of passion about quality to them, so that they see it. And then the afternoons are usually a continuation of some of the meetings and strategic initiatives. I usually try to make a point of talking to a customer every day, at some level or another. And then towards the end of the day, things start getting quiet when we have shift change into second shift. I go out there and see what's going on with that, make sure that the second shift supervisor is oriented, and all the management team is aligned, has been a good handover. And then as the day closes to an end, that's when it gets quiet. And it's a beautiful opportunity to get my actions done and review emails so that the next day I repeat the process.
Just real quickly before we go to Mike, I love the, the sense I get is that you're dealing with, high level strategic issues, but then on the floor. And I like the variety there where I picture you almost zooming in and zooming out throughout the day. But I also, what comes through is that leadership piece from the military of supporting and getting to know your people. And whether that's the people on the line or the people who are your customers that you're talking to, but really going there and being curious about ways in which you can support them. It's great to see that in action.
Yeah, definitely. And it's important because you could get yourself, if you're not talking to the folks on the production floor and not immersing yourselves in understanding the details, then you run the risk of missing some key facts. And then eventually you'll get in trouble. Now, I've got a team of people. My management team. I don't micromanage what they do. I let them do. They're professionals. They are really good at what they do. I let them do that. So you have to be able to step away. They know my intent. They know my end state. So I can back away and let them do what they do well. But at the same time, it's about checking to make sure that my direction is somehow not getting lost in the translation from my management team all the way down to that operator on the floor who's putting a bolt into a chassis.
That's great. Mike, how about you?
Yeah, I think Pete and I, we have the same boss. We work on the staff together. So I think I have a very similar schedule to Pete, and I try and manage it very similarly. I start out the day with some planning and email, and then move to various meetings throughout the day to try and manage the business. I was thinking as Pete was kind of talking that, when you start out in the military, whether you're an officer or an enlisted man, you start out very tactical, very hands-on, out in the woods, marching around or shooting the gun or whatever. Then as you move up the food chain, you're responsible for more and more, and you start thinking more strategically. And I think that really, if you ask my boss what he wants me to do, on a percentage of my time on a daily basis, he wants me thinking strategically. He wants me to spend 75% of my time thinking strategically on where we can take the business, how we can improve the business that we have, how we can expand the business with other additional customers, and then maybe 25% on that tactical, helping program managers manage their program, or addressing a specific issue with the customer, or reviewing specific contract language or something like that. So, and that's a chore, because you could sit in your office and put your head down and be just completely consumed by the tactical every day. But like Pete said, you've got to force yourself to get out, away from that, talking to your people, collecting kind of the big picture, so that you can focus on more strategic things as a senior leader.
I love that balance on that. And I had two questions, Mike, for you in particular. The first one is the distinction between when you're managing a program versus a product or a product line. And could you kind of educate our audience on how you see that distinction?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And I don't think that's very well defined, one, and I think that a lot of companies, if you ask 10 different people, they would all give you different answers. So program management, at first it starts out with project management, right? How I complete a task. I've identified a task, I've identified a project. How do I manage it from end to end? So if I'm designing a mouse for the computer, okay, it starts out in the design phase where we take it all the way through the prototyping into prototype production, test it out with customers, bring it back, refine it, and pretty soon it gets handed off to Pete and his team, and they manufacture it, and we're off and running. That's project management. And program management is usually just managing a collection of projects. So when I think of my team that is out there managing several different design programs, or they're managing some different manufacturing programs and interacting with the customer, that's a program management role. When at SCI and in other companies that I've been to, when we talk about product management, that individual is responsible for the more strategic thinking of where this mouse is going. What is it going to be black in the future? Is it going to right click, or are we just going to wave over it? What features does the customer want? And he or she is responsible for managing the roadmap for this project and when we're going to upgrade it and how smart it needs to be in the future. So those are two very distinct roles. In a lot of companies, maybe if I'm managing something that's relatively small, a lot of program managers do both. They're managing the product line, they're managing their customers, and they're managing the design and engineering projects for that customer or for that product as well. But in larger, mature companies, that role and responsibility is split out, and the product manager is really responsible for that roadmap for the product.
That's great. And the second part of that is, I know a lot of our listeners are always curious about certifications or things that they can do to better prepare them for a role. How critical do you think is a PMP for those who are interested in a career in program management?
I think it's very important. Not that you can't be a great program manager without it, because you certainly can. Experience teaches you a lot more than the PMP certification ever could. But there's a couple good benefits to the PMP certification. One, if it gives you the baseline and language so that when you're talking to other program managers, you're all speaking the same terms. Because PMP in the United States is pretty universal. If you've gone through that, I know what a WBS is, and I know what the structure looks like, and I can speak the same language as all those other program managers. And then it teaches you what best case looks like, or what right looks like, I guess I should say. And I always tell people, if you followed everything in the PMP certification, you did everything, you would have the best documented, best ran program that is over budget and late, because there's just so much to do, right? But it shows you what best practice looks like across a myriad of project management disciplines, and that's where it's valuable. And it's almost like a degree. Just like to get into the Army as an officer, you have to have a degree. Doesn't matter what it's in, but you have to have a degree. A PMP certification is something that it's just expected. And some companies wouldn't even interview you unless you just had that little PMP certification down at the bottom. I've hired a lot of program managers without PMP certifications. Because I see other values that are more important than that. But I also try to get them certified, pretty quickly early in their career. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I love that. I love that distinction too between, like, it comes through as like the theoretical knowledge versus the experience. And I love that snippet about the being over budget and late if you just follow these rules. One last thing I wanted to ask before I move on to Peter is, you had mentioned there, you said you hire people without a PMP because there's other things that you value more. Anything there to share with listeners that might be helpful, of like either traits or previous experience that you feel has been valuable in the people you've hired?
Yeah, I think Pete and I have talked about this quite a bit, but if I could recommend a book for people that are kind of looking to transition to the military, or out of the military, I'd recommend The Ideal Team Player. And he talks about hungry, humble, and smart. And not book smart. He's talking about people smart, how to interface with people. So hungry, humble, and smart, I think, are so much more important than a certification or education or even experience. because people that are hungry, humble, and smart are team players, and they can come in and they're not going to cause problems. They can lead teams. They can be part of teams. Hungry, they're going to dig in. They're going to learn their job and not sit back and wait for somebody to tell them how to do their job or tell them what to do next. So I think those types of attributes are much more important than your education, or certification, or even experience.
That's great. And for listeners, I'll add in the show notes at beyondtheuniform.org for this episode, the ideal team player, so you can check that out. Peter, one thing I wanted to ask about with you is you're responsible for SCI's manufacturing operations, and that includes production and manufacturing and quality engineering and supply chain. So much goes into that. What's the hardest part of your job?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Because I got asked that the other day by somebody else. I think the hardest thing for me is dealing with a lot of the human resources, the human element of the job. I could figure out any problem or try to come up with a solution to any issue that may come up. Certainly if we have to deal with some system complexity or whatnot, I can work through that. But the issue that always is the most difficult is dealing with the motivation, the getting people to do what you want them to do. And it talks to the point that Mike raised earlier about making sure that people remain hungry, that people, it's one thing to be hungry on day one of your new job, but it's another thing entirely when it's year 5 and maybe you've been passed over promotion. You might be not had a raise in 2 years. You're tired. Your boss is breathing down your neck because he wants you to meet a certain deadline. It's at those points that people tend not to be excited and motivated and hungry. So it's about keeping people hungry, about keeping people motivated. It's about winning the hearts and minds of the employees so that they're committed to the cause. And it comes back to a point that Mike raised at the very, very beginning, and that is when you're in the military, when you give out an order, people do it, and if their heart and soul isn't into doing it, they got a sergeant major that's going to breathe down their neck. Whereas here, you have to lead. And you can't pretend to be a leader. You can't hide behind a rank on your shoulder. You actually have to lead through the issue and get people motivated to solve the problem and to deliver because they want to do it. And they want to do it because it's for the best of the organization. It's for the best of the company. And I would say that is probably the hardest thing because even ourselves, we get sometimes it's easy to get complacent and to get worn down or tired and I've seen this issue like 5 times in the last 6 months. But it's important that you demonstrate to your teams, a continuous mindset of continuous improvement and about staying fresh and hungry.
I think it's interesting to through that lens of hearts and mind and the lens of keeping people hungry, viewing your 2 hours a day where you're going through and meeting people face to face, it takes on a whole new meaning because I'm guessing that in that time you're forging that relationship so that your quote unquote orders carry more weight, but also understanding what motivates them, how to keep them engaged, how to keep them hungry. That's it's interesting to think now of those 2 hours of your day each day.
Yeah, and it gets more complex because we're seeing a shift in generation here from the baby boomers that were much more loyal to organizations. We're willing to put up with, I think, a lot more of the I got to characterize this well, but I mean they were a little bit more patient in terms of the organizations that they worked for. Now we got millennials that are coming up that they need to be constantly given new challenges and regularly motivated. So you got a different generation, and now we got this new generation, Gen Z coming up. which are it was an entirely different set of challenges. So you really have to become a bit of a chameleon here in terms of identifying the audience and being able to get the right messaging across to motivate that audience and keep them passionate about what they do.
I'm imagining many of our listeners either do or will be managing that diverse type of workforce, and I imagine it's hard to speak in generalities, but any insights stand out to you about how to approach leading Generation Z versus millennial versus the baby boomers?
Yeah, and so this is one of the big challenges and risks that people leaving the military service have. You go from this environment where there's a lot of structure and command, where orders are followed. At times, it can be very autocratic. So there is a tendency to port over that style into the civilian workforce. And this is one of the things that I had to learn pretty quickly, and that is I had to change my approach. I had to change the way I led people. And if you try, that dictatorial approach or autocratic approach, it may not resonate with your employees, especially across these different generations. And so one of the things that's people have to understand is you have to employ a softer leadership style, more collaborative, more servant leadership style, which would be very uncharacteristic in the military, but in the civilian world, those resonate very well with the millennials and even the Gen Zs that are coming up. They want to see you as more of a facilitator. Facilitate, give me the tools, give me the experience, the opportunities that I need to grow and kind of, stand back, course correct, but let me do my thing. And you get great results when you do that. But it takes a certain amount of self-awareness. And as Mike had pointed out earlier, you've got to sometimes take a dose of humility because you're going to get a 20-something that's going to really show you something amazing. And if you don't have humility and an ability to stand back and watch and keep an open mind, you might miss that.
That's great. One last question for you, Peter, is if someone listening is interested in a career in manufacturing production, any advice on how to approach that career or things they can start doing now to get ready for it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, I've been asked that question before, and I really characterize it to 5 things that I would recommend people do if they're interested in a career in manufacturing. Number 1 is get your skills up or study on the technology or get more technically aware or astute. One of the challenges when I see an individual who's seeking to get out of the military, the one concern I have often is how are their technical skills? Are they going to be willing to embrace new technology? So that's number 1. Number 2 is really do a lot of reading and studying quite a bit about lean systems, lean practices. This is something that that's quite a bit foreign to a lot of folks in the military, is the idea that doing more with less and how do you get efficient. I think number 3 is to I always tell people, when you're in that job search mode, when you're leaving the military, take a look at your resume. It's 1 page that's supposed to describe you in its entirety. And does it really speak to voluminous activity that you do in your life, or is it pretty plain Jane, right? And because this is the things we look for when we're interviewing, we're looking for the complete person. Do they just surf the internet, or are they taking night courses? Are they looking to complete a certification, or do they just watch TV in the evenings? This type of thing. And number 4 is network. I always tell people that the online job postings are merely the start. You really want to network. You really want to get out and get to know organizations that are out there that you're interested in possibly working for. And then lastly, I think it's for those people that are leaving the military that seek to have a leadership role, spend the time to study and read about leadership techniques that are more effective in the private sector or public sector. Really get, spend the time to understand that it's a different world than perhaps what you're used to, but the time spent getting ready for that transition will pay back in spades later on.
That's great. I'll ask Mike and then Peter, but any for listeners, that could be people on active duty, people who've been out for a few years, military families or spouses. Anything you'd like them to know about why they should consider a career at SCI or what the culture is like?
Yeah, SCI is one. And I think this is true for a lot of defense contractors. You'll find that defense contractors are very friendly to exiting military. One, it would look very silly if you were in the reserves and they didn't support you as a reservist, or they didn't support your transition. That would look terrible for them because they're defense contractors. That's where all their money comes from. And SCI is no exception. SCI is very pro-veteran, pro-military, and most of the leadership at SCI has a lot of experience hiring people coming out of the military. I know in my program managers, for instance, I would say 40 to 50% of my program managers are prior military. I hire a lot of captain, major, junior officers, maybe early field grade officers coming out. And of course, all over the defense industry, there's a lot of, whether it's enlisted for my technical FAE type guys, or a colonel for maybe a larger role or even a business development role. So SCI has good benefits for veterans. You'll find that a lot of places, if you're a reservist, will pay the difference between what you make when you're on drill or when you're on your advanced training and what you make in your job, because most of the time it's less. And SCI does that. So those types of things make it a great place for people to work. The last thing I would say is that SCI is fast paced, and that's, I have one of my program managers, a new one that just got out of the Army, logistics officer, and he said, "Man, I start in the morning, I do a couple emails, I look up, it's lunchtime, I look back down, and it's 4 o'clock, and it's like, man, it's just very fast paced." So if you like that kind of stuff, which a lot of military people do, nothing would be less appealing to me than to take a government job where the hardest thing I have to do that day is to finish my crossword puzzle in the morning. And that appeals to some people, but that doesn't appeal to me. So if you're like Pete and I, that like the fast pace and problems and dealing with people, SCI is a great place to work. That's
great. Anything to add on that, Pete?
No, I mean, he really characterized it well. I mean, especially the part about being fast paced. There's no boredom in this job. I worked at General Dynamics, and that was a different industry in sort of a different capacity. And things were significantly slower in terms of the pace and the intensity than they are here. So this is you're kind of, I almost think of it as a bit of an adrenaline sort of thing. We're adrenaline junkies over here, but there have been employers that I've had in my career where I almost had to sort of hide the fact that I was a reservist. You think that's kind of strange, but the reason why is that it wasn't so much about job protection as it was about career protection. And I was always worried that if they would question my loyalties and my commitment if I admitted that I was a reservist, because they would have felt that, well, I can't promote you because you're not available 24/7 when I need you. You might be off gallivanting all over the world. So that doesn't exist here. I feel really proud about my military service here. As Mike had alluded to, we have a lot of folks here that are former military. So there's a sort of sense of passion and a sense of camaraderie And a lot of that, I mentioned early on in this call about the things that I missed in the military, which was that teamwork and that camaraderie, the people. You know what? We get it here, and it's exciting because we have a common bond, and that is that we wore the uniform at some point, and it's amazing how that brings people together. So yeah, I mean, it's I won't talk to the benefits and all that stuff like as Mike did, but I really I think that it's from an ex-military perspective, it couldn't be a better place to work.
Well, similar to, it sounds like what your J job is, that the time has flown by here. I know I usually like to just keep the last minute or two to be more open-ended. We'll start with Peter and then go to Mike, but we covered a lot of ground. I'm sure there's things that we didn't talk about. I'd love to make space for either what have we not covered you want listeners to know, or what are just some final words of wisdom you'd like listeners to leave with?
Yeah, so a couple of points, and you know, when I look back on things, I always tell people, I say this to my kids too, always remember the attributes that made you successful in the military and port those over to the civilian side. So things like, you know, your continuous growth and improvement, things like, you know, you're taking risks, your attention to detail, all these things that were, you know, made you successful in the military, they are very important on the in the civilian side. Number two is continue to grow. Never, ever, ever stop growing. Read a lot. Really study all the time. You look at my, you know, I'm in the middle of pursuit of a PhD. I have no business doing that at my age, but it's about continuous growth and constantly making sure that you're better tomorrow than you were yesterday. And so if you develop that sort of approach in your life, you will always find yourself employed. There will never be a time when you're going to find yourself unemployed because it's a mindset that exists. And I think number three is, again, it comes back to what I said earlier, you know, really think about and work on the softer leadership tone that I mentioned earlier. It's important that when you get out into the civilian side, that your approach is different in terms of leadership than what you had in the military. It's, you know, it's not insurmountable. It's certainly easy to come up with. There's a great book that I read, and I passed it out to all my managers. It's almost mandatory reading. It's called Good Boss, Bad Boss by Sutton. And this is an excellent book to explain all the bad things that people do, and sometimes they don't even know they're doing it. And so, you know, I'm not trying to plug his book here, but it's a wonderful sort of transition book that people can read to kind of give them a sense of what they're about to encounter.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I think Pete nailed the major points. I guess I would say to folks, I was more nervous than I needed to be coming out of the military. So don't be nervous. Well, be nervous about it if it's healthy. Don't be overly nervous about it. You're going to find a job. Everybody tells you that your skills translate well. Well, guess what they do? Especially those fundamental characteristics and those core values from the military translate perfectly into the civilian world. The hard work and ethic that you've developed while you're in the military translate fantastically. And then I think Pete hit the most important one, is that continuously learning. I have at least one business book or leadership book or management book that I'm reading all the time. And then I'll throw in a Harry Potter or something for fun. But I've always got some kind of professional development book sitting on my on the nightstand, or I'm listening to it on Audible or something like that. So that continuous development, I don't know that I'll ever get a PhD like Pete, but I'll read a bunch of books anyway. So that's my advice.
Beautiful. Well, I know that both of you have full schedules between your work and the continuous pursuit of excellence. So I appreciate your taking the time to speak with me and Beyond the Uniform today. And thank you so much.
Yeah,
all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Surface. Surface.
Beyond the Uniform is written and produced by me, Justin Nassiri, with help from our Chief of Staff, Steve Bain, and our editor, Kathleen Dillon. We are an all-volunteer organization and would greatly appreciate your help in any of the following ways. First, spread the word. Beyond the Uniform has over 330 podcast episodes and 15 on-demand webinars, all offered for free. Help us spread the word on social media, at military bases, or whatever gets this resource in front of more men and women who need it. Positive reviews on iTunes go a long way towards this as well. Second, sponsorship. Beyond the Uniform relies on sponsorship to keep us going. There is so much more we'd like to do, but we don't have nearly the resources to do so. If you know of a company that would like to advertise in any way with Beyond the Uniform, please send them to beyondtheuniform.org. Third, donations. If you're in a financial position to donate, you can find more information on the support section of beyondtheuniform.org. At our website, beyondtheuniform.org, you'll also find 330 plus episodes categorized by industry, functional role, and more. You'll find a link for live events, typically 4 per month. You'll also find both free and for purchase books that take a deeper dive on topics related to career growth. Thank you for your support as we aim to help members of the military and their families thrive in their post-military career and life.